of the 8 medical conditions that have been, do you know if we've had someone from each of those categories that is applied? Do you know? Is that
I believe we have not, but I would prefer to give you that information next time.
Okay, that'd be good. We'll look forward to that. Any questions for Dr. Fitzgerald before we move on from the members of the panel? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're also going to get a quick update from Dr. Young Park, who has been leading the charge for the clinical trial study at GRU, which is the state has made a substantial commitment to. Dr. Park is one of the foremost experts on epilepsy treatments, and so Dr. Park, as always, we're glad to have you here and appreciate your expertise. Yes, and so if you would just give us a real quick update of how those clinical trials are going.
As of today, we have a true track of exposure to the other Georgia children who has been suffering from epilepsy. One track is the GW Pharma initiative, a double-blind of official studies, which is ended up to the H.O.P.E to submit to the FDA to get approval, which is the two-site expanded patients, about the 29 exposed in Georgia children right now. And then the double-blind study group, Dravet is about 11 patients, and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome is 12 patients so far. And then Governor Deere's sponsored Georgia CBD trial. As today, we enrolled 31 patients. Okay. We should be proud of this enrollment because it was only one state, which is Georgia. No other states are allowed to use in this CBD cannabidiol from the GW Pharma. It's actually purely CBD by itself. We enrolled 31 patients. Among those is about 2/3 of them is exposed to medicine. 1/3 of them is waiting for the timing of baseline right now. So that's as today.
Okay, so making some good progress, at least even since last time when we met. Is that right? Yeah. Dr. Park, could you, I know there, for those from the public here and those from the media, for those folks in our state who have an interest in participating in the trials, who maybe they're for the first time are hearing about it, what is the best method for them to go forward in potentially participating in the clinical trial?
There has to be fit into the inclusion criteria. Age is 1 to 18 years old. It has to be tried at least 4 AED seizure medications. Currently has to take in at least 2 medications simultaneously. Seizure number is at least 1 per week. So average is 8 per 8 weeks baseline time. If it's fit into those inclusion criteria, and then enroll through the Augusta GRU, 2 sites of Atlanta, 1 site in the Savannah, Georgia. Currently, 3 sites is begin to enroll. We're waiting for 1 site in the Atlanta at this point.
And if a family member or a parent wants to, where would be the best contact point? Should they go through their physician to contact you at GRU? Is that the best?
Right.
Okay.
GRU, and the website is available, so you can come in and then we can guide you where is the nearest is the site. Savannah, Atlanta.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Whitmore, I see you got a question in
there. I also wanted to point out that Children's Healthcare of Atlanta should be open very soon. We're just waiting for the last signature from the GRU. Great. So hopefully later.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Park and Dr. Whitmore. Okay. And then Dr. Mandy Reese. Would you mind, I kind of charged Dr. Reese last time with coming up with a position statement or trying to obtain a position statement from the Pharmacy Association. Would you mind just sharing that with the group? Yep. 23.
Okay. The Georgia pharmacists support safe and consistent access for patients to any legal doctor-recommended therapy. Furthermore, pharmacists are highly trained and licensed by the state of Georgia to dispense dangerous, controlled, addictive, and/or highly regulated substances prescribed by a physician. The Georgia legislature's passed legislation to legalize cannabis oil for medical use in our state, a use that is currently prohibited by federal law. Ideally, we believe medical cannabis should be dispensed by a licensed pharmacist and regulated by the Georgia Board of Pharmacy, as well as all other scheduled drugs are. However, we also believe the current federal prohibition creates an environment of uncertainty and potential liability to any entity that dispenses the substance in Georgia until federal law is amended to legalize cannabis oil for medical use. The Georgia Pharmacy Association does not support the involvement of pharmacists in the dispensing of the substance in Georgia.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? So basically, tell the feds to hurry up, huh?
Yes, but I'll mention this later, but I think there's other roles that a pharmacist could play outside of dispensing.
Okay, yeah, we'd love your input on that and the Pharmacy Association's input on that as well too. Okay, let's get to our game plan today. This is a open hearing, but we are only hearing testimony from invited guests today. Ryan Teague has not showed up, has he? No. Okay. We'll let him speak for the governor in a moment when he gets here too. We do have 4 different manufacturers who have been involved in the medical cannabis industry all over the country, from all over different areas of the country. And so to the members of the committee, we have these 4 experts, in effect, who have had real-world practice in the business, the medical cannabis business. And so I hope that you'll be prepared with questions to ask them. The goal of today is to find out from these experts if it is the public policy of this state to move down a path of having an in-state cultivation model for medical cannabis in Georgia. What's the best practices? What works and what does not work from a business standpoint, from a security standpoint? I hope you'll feel free to answer questions. We'll conduct business like we did last time, which is by Robert's Rules of Order. So if you have a question, just hit your button next to your microphone, and we'll allow you to ask the question. Our first guest today is Jason Cranford. Jason, if you'll come on up. Jason is the founder of Flowering Hope Foundation. Is the creator of the strain Haley's Hope, which has been used by many of the family members in Georgia after HB1 has been accessed. So on behalf of a lot of the families that have benefited, thank you, Jason, for the incredible work you've done for that. And we look forward to your testimony today. And the mic is yours.
It is now.
Yep, there we go.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Cranford, of the founder of the 501c3 nonprofit Flowering Hope Foundation and the creator of the high CBD, low THC strain of cannabis known as Haley's Hope. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Georgia about the benefits of CBD and medical cannabis. I would like to begin by talking about the path that led me to where I am today in this industry. I started in this industry in Northern California in 2007. I had experience with greenhouse growing that started in Athens, Georgia, at the University of Georgia Horticultural Department, where I was an intern. Although my studies at the college were business macroeconomics, I was very interested in plants and the natural remedies they provide. This led me to Northern California to work for a cultivation team that supplied medical cannabis to San Francisco Bay Area dispensaries. While in the Bay Area, I came across the work of Professor Raphael Mechoulam from the Hebrew School of Medicine in Israel. Apparently, our very own National Institute of Health was funding Professor Mechoulam to study the medical benefits of cannabis. I found this very odd, considering that marijuana is categorized by the same government as a Schedule I controlled substance with no medical benefits. I saw a blatant level of hypocrisy within our government that I'd never seen before. This intrigued me, and I wanted to learn more, so I started doing research on this plant and was shocked to see studies from all over the world that proved its efficacy with various medical conditions. I even found a U.S. study from the 1940s that reported cannabis was effective at eliminating seizures and epilepsy. Around 2009, I started hearing rumors that Colorado was going to be the first state in the country to actually issue a state license to cultivate and distribute medical cannabis. We did not have this level of protection in California, so I packed up and moved to Colorado on a mission to find a strain that was high in CBD. I knew what CBD was at this point in my career through my research and the research of Professor Mechoulam, but the rest of the industry was only aware of THC. I went around Colorado and collected around 50 plants from various growers with the intention of getting them lab tested in hopes of finding a strain that was high in CBD. I found one in 2009, and I remember the grower telling me the strain was not very good because it was weak and not very potent. He claimed he was not going to grow it anymore. What he was unaware of was that the plant he didn't like had the highest level of CBD in the state of Colorado. If he would have lab tested the strains, he would have known how valuable of a plant was in his possession. I sent it to the lab, and the lab responded back with excitement and joy that it was the first CBD strain ever recorded analytically in the state of Colorado and the highest CBD content the lab has seen worldwide. The plant had twice as much CBD as THC, so I started using this plant as a medicine in 2010 and continued to breed it with other plants I found for the next 4 years. In 2013, I was able to lower the THC below 1% through extensive breeding projects. This strain became known as Haley's Hope. To date, over 1,000 people have used this strain effectively nationwide. The work I've done in this industry is called international intention and has awarded me the opportunity to work in several states and countries. I've seen medical marijuana states fall flat on their faces with overregulation strangling the businesses that are trying to provide the product. I've seen several states flourish and become profitable. Currently, I'm operating in seven states in the U.S., so I have seen many different state models. To be perfectly honest, the most profitable states are states that allow excessive pain as a condition and allow the smoking of the plant flower, even though this is frowned upon. Smoking the plant flower is an immediate way to deliver the cannabinoids to the brain, and it is the lowest risk of consuming too much, which is commonly associated with edibles and extracts. It is the most profitable model, but it carries the highest level of reefer madness stigma. When you're taking concentrates, you don't know how much you're taking. Everybody responds differently to it. If you're smoking a flower through a vaporizer, you can take one hit and then see how that feels, take another one. If you're eating an edible or an oil, you're pretty much stuck with what you ingested. So if you ingest too much, it can lead to a very uncomfortable and bad feeling. I've seen states that attempted to be the sole license holder and cultivate and distribute through a state-run system. This model gives the local government control over healthcare and will not make the citizens very happy. It would be similar to our government trying to manufacture and distribute narcotics. The model would probably work, but I feel like there would be some very irritated forces trying to prevent it from happening because it gives the government too much control over an individual's healthcare and the options they choose. The majority of the states have implemented rigorous security programs that are similar to military protocol or pharmaceutical manufacturers' requirements. These regulations require internet-based surveillance cameras, alarm systems with motion and heat detection, commercial locks on every door, live security patrols with armed personnel, extensive inventory tracking systems with RFID technology embedded in the tags that are mandated to be attached to every plant. The couriers that deliver the products from the manufacturing facility to the distribution point are federally background checked and bonded. In states that have these strict requirements, it is very difficult for any large amount of cannabis to remove from the inventory. I would like to point out that there's not really too much you can do about somebody taking one or two little small pieces, but to remove a large amount of cannabis from one of these facilities is virtually impossible. It just can't be done. You would get caught. I was present for the Georgia legislative hearings on HB1 last year. One of the things that was upsetting was the fact that fibromyalgia was not included as a qualifying condition. THC is an excellent pain reliever and is much safer than narcotics. It is impossible to overdose on it, and it does not damage the liver and kidneys like pharmaceutical drugs. This year, I'd like to see Georgia remove the 5% cap and allow a broader range of cannabinoids. There have been no negative impacts that I'm aware of as a result of HB1. If we remove the restrictions imposed by HB1, we will be able to help more people suffering than we are currently. The 1-to-1 requirement on the cannabinoid content does not allow THCA, which is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that is similar to CBD. I would say that 100% of the families that moved from Georgia to Colorado seeking my help were using THCA for seizure control. It does not make sense to punish many innocent suffering people because a government body is worried about a few people abusing it to get high. With a 1-to-1 ratio, we could never create THCA here. So THCA is the undecarboxylated, unactivated form of THC. When it grows naturally on the plant, it's not psychoactive, it's not activated. If you ate the entire plant, it wouldn't really do anything to you. You wouldn't even feel it. But if you were to heat this same plant up to 225 degrees for 30 minutes, you're breaking off a carboxyl chain. It's kind of a chemistry reaction where it goes from acidic to an active form that fits through the receptors. So a lot of these children in Colorado are using THCA. It's a great muscle relaxer. It relieves spasms, and it doesn't get you high. It doesn't break the blood-brain barrier. It circulates through the body. And to do this, you have to grow a plant that's high in THC. Not a 1-to-1 plant, because a 1-to-1 plant will actually interfere with the CBD milligram dosages of the patient. So to do a THCA strain, which is non-psychoactive, there can't be any type of restrictions on the cannabinoid profile like the 1-to-1, and you can't have any caps on it. Like it can't be 5% because the strains of cannabis that are being grown around the country, nothing is 5% anymore. Everything's 10, 15, 20%. But if it was regulated and put into a dose, like a milligram dose, then obviously the parents or the patient, if it was adults, would know exactly what they're taking every time, and it wouldn't have a psychoactive effect. In closing, I would like to say that I'm very proud of my home state for moving forward with this effort and looking at this with an open mind. We American people have been lied to about this plant for almost 100 years now, and it makes me proud to know my home state of Georgia is looking through the lies and standing up against the federal government to protect their citizens. Now we just need to allow cultivation so we are no longer putting our citizens at risk of federal interstate trafficking. Right now, these law-abiding citizens are forced to go to other states and obtain these federally illegal medicines to bring back to Georgia. If they were able to obtain it here, we would not be putting our citizens at risk by forcing them to become drug smugglers. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to shed some light on this subject.
Thank you, Mr. Cranford. We'll open it up for questions. I know I've got several, but others that might have. Let's see. Yes, Mr. Rickman.
Hey, thank you for being here. To make sure I understand, when you were talking about the percentage being higher than 5%, are you describing that the actual plant grown would have a much higher percentage than 5%, and the actual oil produced would be less, or would the oil be? Can you kind of flesh that out for me?
Yeah. So the strains of cannabis that are in circulation now throughout the country, I've seen them test anywhere from 10% to 30%. So working in 7 different states, I've seen it all pretty much. The strains that come out at 10% are, obviously not as potent as the ones that come out at 20%. So when we do this in other states, what we're looking for is those higher numbers, because it's basically, we're past the point of growing marijuana and trying to get pounds. What we're looking at is milligrams. So if we have 1 square foot of grow space with a strain that's 10%, as opposed to a strain that's 20%, we produce twice the amount of THC or THCA milligrams in that square foot with a higher strain. So to limit it to 5% or 10%, you're still getting THC out of it, or THCA. The only thing you're doing is you're limiting your grow capacity and making it less efficient. So you have to have larger spaces to grow the same amount of milligrams as you would as if you had a plant that was 20%.
What do you have any thought or recommendation? And Haley's Hope, and I apologize, Haley's Hope is 5% or less. Is that correct?
Yeah, Haley's Hope has several different phenos. That was a strain I bred. So when you're breeding strains, you're cross-pollinating, you're creating seeds. And so one of the phenotypes I have of Haley's Hope meets hemp requirement. So it's below 0.3%, and it's around 0.2. I have another one that we use in Colorado that's around 1%. So the ratio is what everybody's looking for, 20 to 1, 30 to 1, CBD to THC. It's just, parts, 20 parts CBD, 1 part THC. So I've somehow figured out a way to keep the ratio the same, even though I dropped the THC level below the hemp requirements determined by the United States Farm Bill. So we keep it lowered the CBD level with the THC, so it's the same ratio, but one qualifies as hemp and one doesn't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator
Following along that train of thought, and help me to understand, I appreciate you coming. So when you say it qualifies to meet the Farm Bill and the hemp requirements, does that mean that you ship it into states that allow hemp to be brought there based upon the federal Farm Bill? Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So what percentage of your business model is based on shipping it out to other states?
We just started shipping about a month ago. So basically, this is a very gray, highly ambiguous area in the federal law. So we researched it thoroughly. I even sent a letter to the DEA and asked them for clarification. The DEA responded that you can't ship anything, not CBD, not hemp, not THC, nothing. They brought up a couple of other manufacturers as a reference point to say what they're doing is illegal. So then I asked them, okay, so I'm growing medical cannabis in Colorado. What's your position on that? And they said it's illegal. So it's all about what they choose to enforce. And so recently the FDA sent out a round of letters to several manufacturers and demanded that they change their labeling because they weren't compliant with FDA labeling. And they also claimed that you cannot call a CBD product a dietary supplement. So I sat back and looked at this enforcement action, and I wondered to myself, why is the FDA bothering people about their labels instead of the DEA bothering people about their CBD content? So they kind of showed their hands in. They showed their cards. Basically, the DEA had to go to the FDA and start cracking down on labels because there's precedent cases set in court with hemp. Dr. Bonner's soap is a hemp product that's the hemp's cultivated in another country, and they bring it in, and it's distributed nationwide. And the DEA tried to shut him down, and he beat them in Supreme Court because the DEA has no jurisdiction over hemp. Hemp is not a Schedule I controlled substance. Marijuana is. So up until 2014, we didn't know the difference between hemp and marijuana. There was no definitive line between the two. So the U.S. Farm Bill came out in 2014, and it actually gave us that definition that we needed. It defined hemp as a strain of cannabis sativa with less than 0.3 THC. So that actually inadvertently removed it from the Schedule I controlled substance because it's not marijuana, it's hemp.
So I guess my question, and I've thought about this a lot, if you're looking at the big picture and expanding in Georgia and you want to encourage capitalism and entrepreneurship, and you seem like a pretty good one, how do you expect individuals who don't have readily available capital to be able to do that? Because when you're asking for loans, your business model is based on something that federally is against the law. So aren't you just precluding that only people that are operating in other states would move into Georgia, that you really couldn't have a Georgia grown? I wish the commissioner was here. You couldn't have Georgia grown entrepreneurs because they wouldn't be able to get loans unless they subsidize it from something else. But what I'm saying is, if you don't have the capital, you really couldn't do this. Is that not correct?
No, you're absolutely right about that. Banking is one of the hardest issues. In Colorado, my bank accounts last about 6 months. It's not the local branches. We use Wells Fargo. They will not give us a loan based on our business type.
Right.
As you know, it's high risk. But they also won't loan money to strip clubs or gambling operations. It's not just us. You know,
right.
It's any type of high risk investment. They won't loan money to.
But getting back to my question, I don't mean to interrupt, but just my question is, if we do this in the state of Georgia, are you not precluding that only people like you would move into the state and do it? Or you would move back home, but other people, other corporations would move into the state. Is that true?
If you do this, if you allow licensing in the state, you're going to get approached by companies in all of the medical marijuana states. What I've noticed going around the country is the same group of investors.
Right.
The businesses are different, but if you track the money
right.
back, it always comes back to the same, like 4 or 5 different groups of investors.
That's what I was going to say. How many are there?
I've seen about 5 major ones. 5 major, it's almost like hedge fund. It's private money. They round it up. You know, it's all traceable. It's all legitimate money. They go around and use it like hedge fund money. They finance these types of businesses in multiple states. So I imagine the same thing would happen in Georgia. But there's also Georgia investors. I've been approached by at least 24 investors from Georgia that are qualified, seasoned investors, multimillionaires that would invest into it. And so Colorado was really worried about outside money coming in, illegal money or drug cartel money. So they made a residency requirement there where only a resident of that state could actually own one of these licenses because they wanted the money to be tracked. It ended up being that it's kind of unconstitutional to say that because there's no other sector that requires a 2-year residency requirement before you apply for a state license. I've never seen this in any other model, so it's a little unconstitutional.
Well, actually, I think we do have that, and Brian Keenan can probably speak about that with the pain clinics, right? We do have models that preclude that. Yes, we do, like pain clinics.
Yeah, but does it require a 2-year residency? So you have to live in the state for 2 years before you can apply for that license type?
I don't think it is 2 years, but you have to be a legal resident of the state of Georgia.
Yeah, that's commonly seen in plenty of types of businesses, but the 2 years prior to applying is what the state of Colorado is having so much problems with. People are challenging the law, they're filing lawsuits, and so they're trying to overturn it. And eventually, if it makes it to appellate court, I believe it will be overturned because it's ridiculous to require somebody to live in a state 2 years prior to applying. What are they supposed to do for those 2 years?
That's it.
Let's see, Dr. Whitmore, is that what you, let's see, Dr. Allen, oh, Dr. Park, got it.
As a physician, we have to know the side effect of THC, which we know some other developmental brain, particularly in the young children and young adults, repetitive exposed to THC is getting damage to the brain. So that is very concerning. That's why the FDA is very strict, required to the research to side effect as well as the benefit. Then they approve. That's the one my comment. But when through the registrations, one of the patients who has your product, and then showed to me how much is the dosing. But I was surprised there is no information to allow us how many milligrams per 1 ml or certain amount of concentrations. There's a lack of dosing. So that's really surprising to, as a physician, to see how much I need to guide them to how much milligram per kilo or the CBD amount. We do know, begin to understand through the study how many milligram per kilo is a requirement for the beneficiary, but in order to convert to your product, there's no clear information from the labeling.
Yes, and that's because of the FDA. So basically, if I were to sell a product over a state line that has the milligrams per ml listed on the label, then the FDA would attack me. I would get a fine, they'd send me a letter. So we've had to do this very strangely, believe it or not. So our website, our ordering website, doesn't have any mention of CBD or THC on it. If we did that, we'd be breaking federal law. If we shipped a product into Georgia from Colorado, per se, that had CBD content listed on the label, or even the word CBD, cannabidiol, or tetrahydrocannabinol, then we're selling a product where we're advertising that it has a FDA or a Schedule I controlled substance in it. So basically, we're selling this as a food product. The FDA has 3 labeling requirements: one for food, one for drugs, and one for dietary supplements. And so we're selling this as a food product. It's a plant extract. We label it as such to stay in compliance with the FDA. And then when the people buy it, we have a secret Facebook group that you can't see. You can't see the members. It's totally confidential. And once the people purchase it, we allow them to enter this Facebook group. And inside that Facebook group is where we have all of the lab reports, the dosing calculators, all of the information that's not showing up on the label that you've probably seen.
So that means at this point is your product cannot be selling as a medical product.
Correct.
It's a food.
I can't ship this with any medical claims. You know the old comment, it's not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent any medical conditions. So if I were to put that it contains cannabidiol, then the FDA would say, well, that's a Schedule I controlled substance, and you can't advertise that on your label. So we very carefully watched what was going on in the country with people getting these enforcement letters from the FDA. And I researched this thoroughly before I started shipping. People were asking me to ship a year ago, And I refused to do it until I thoroughly researched it, and it took me about 8 months to get it figured out how to do it and stay in compliant with the federal government. So right now our shipping is in compliant with the federal government regardless of what the DEA says. The DEA says a lot of things. What they can actually convict you for in a court of law is a different story.
That means our program through the physicians have no idea how much is supposed to give to the patients, guiding to, there's no lack of knowledge. So how we can open then our Georgian folks to, through the doctors, how much you're giving.
Yeah, so
Jason, let me stop there for a minute. Dr. Park, I want to, because that's a fair question, and I think Dr. Fitzgerald, would you mind responding with what, or maybe Dr. House may put you on the spot, but there are protocols in place, am I not correct, that the physicians who have registered patients will be required to provide quarterly reports of reaction, dosage information from the patients. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. It will probably be ready in a month or so, but certainly the reports are the reactions of the patients that they have under their care. But the requirement of the law, the requirement of the registry is simply for the physician to certify that that patient has one of the 8 conditions. And by the way, I got an email from one of my employees, and we are covering all 8 of the conditions. So it simply certifies the condition that's being treated. There are no requirements under this law for dosage. We are asking for dosage, but the registry is for the listing of the condition.
Okay, but that information provided back by the physician
should give us some information.
Right, should provide some type of database for citizens that are registered that will be beneficial, hopefully, for future.
It would be very interesting to me, though, for the folks that are doing the production, if there was a secure website where a physician could get that data available.
Well, Georgia would be a different story. So if we were actually producing it in Georgia, we could put the milligrams per ml on the labels. It's when you're shipping it across the state line is when the problem comes in. And so for Dr. Park, here's a bottle right here with the labeling. There's no milligrams per ml. So the person who bought this bottle has the lab report for this product. So if you asked one of the users or one of the patients of this product, to bring you a lab report, then they would bring you a lab report showing you exactly how many milligrams of CBD and THC are in each ml of the liquid. We just can't put it on the bottle, or else I won't be able to ship it without, getting a $10,000 fine.
Dr. Park, your concerns are that physicians don't know what the dosage is. That correct? Okay, that's a valid concern. And one that I think probably every manufacturer is probably having to deal with as well too. I'm sure every time you sell the product, you're getting families or citizens asking questions about what the dosage should be.
Exactly.
Is that not correct?
So we start out very small. Excuse me, go ahead.
And one of a follow-up question I'd like to know is, when you get the lab reports, how often are those? How often is the potency verified for that particular strain of plant? Is the lab report twice a year, or is there a schedule?
Every batch. And so we make it the same every time. We use the same strains. So every single time we make a batch, it's a really large batch. So the extraction equipment I use can run about 15 pounds of plant material through it. So we basically will harvest a whole greenhouse, and we run it in 15 pound sections. And then after we get the concentrated oil out, we homogenize all of the oil together. So that standardizes it. And then it's just it's an R&D lab test on a HPLC to show us exactly what's in it. And then I know how to dilute it down. If I want 20 milligrams per ml, then I can do the math with milliliters and milligrams and add the amount of the carrier liquid, which is safflower oil, to the actual hemp or cannabis extract. So that's how we standardize it every time it comes out the same, but we still batch test every batch.
On your labeling, is the batch number listed? For example, and I'm thinking particularly about we had some problems, of course, with some medication that was produced by compounding pharmacies, and there was a contaminant in it. So having the batch number when we were trying to trace the contaminants was very helpful. So is it on it now, or could it be put on it now and still avoid some of the federal requirements?
It is. So every bottle that we ship out has a batch number on the label. And then once you get into the private Facebook group, you go into our file section and then you look for that batch number. And when you click on that, then it pulls up the entire lab report where we test for E. coli, aspergillus, mucor, microbials, heavy metals, pesticides, everything. And so you can look at your bottle and then match that batch number up to our lab report and see that it's clean, and you can see the potency.
Good question. Senator Utterman, your question?
My question is actually for Dr. Fitzgerald. I know we have 160 physicians that are signed up, and I know the diagnoses were listed in the law, but there's no continuing education or initial education of these physicians, because I really don't know where you would go because there hasn't been any research. But is there a protocol, or is the medical composite board, or does that need to be formulated so that, especially if you came to prosecution of these providers, giving the DAs the tools, if they didn't follow the guidelines or they didn't meet the credentialing procedure? Can you elaborate on that? And I'm sorry to take away from Mr. Cranford.
Okay. Good question.
I want to know the answer to that.
Certainly. No, there is not a standard protocol. And again, the law is very clear that the only thing the physician is doing is certifying that the person, for example, has Lou Gehrig's disease. The physician is not taking responsibility for the protocol at all. And one of the things that, quite frankly, concerns me is if you're looking at a protocol, you're forming that on best practices. That's why we are so interested in the work that's being done, so that we can have a baseline of best practices. And we're certainly using the law to try to collect some data so that we may have enough data so that you can get to best practice. But the law does not have a protocol at all.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, if you did have a protocol and if you did have best practices, does that not open up that provider to tort laws, saying that you're now liable? And maybe some of the attorneys here on the commission could answer that. Would that not be opening the door a little bit wider, and they may be reluctant to go on to the list? Is that not true?
That's certainly a possibility. And again, the law is very clear that when they sign up, as a matter of fact, the patient has to sign a release for the physician. When you go to see the physician, a release has to be signed by the patient that says, I understand that I am receiving a medication that is still under investigation, basically.
Okay.
Dr. Fitzgerald, I think, and just to correct me if I'm wrong too, sorry, did you have another question?
No.
You are checking. One of the responsibilities is to make that it is a valid physician that is applying to the registry, and y'all have actually.
What is a physician described as?
Well, it's somebody who has a medical license in the state of Georgia.
So it could be a DO.
Yes.
MD.
Yes. Yes.
But nothing else?
No, nothing else. And as a matter of fact, it has been a very efficient process. We have identified, for example, probably a very precocious physician, a 17-year-old who put his correct name on it, and that person was quickly identified as not a physician. Okay. So the
safeguards are working.
The safeguards are working.
That's good.
Yes.
That's good to know. Okay. Let's see. Yes, Dr. Whitmore.
Say to Representative Utterman that there are data out there in the literature published from Great Britain and other countries where there are protocols about the dosing, and I tell my colleagues that they can consult that literature or myself, because there's ample literature out there about milligrams per kilogram and the effect and what type of effect and overdosing type of side effects. Part of it was, and part of it is from other sources where they've been able to purify by HPLC and determine the actual content of it. Some of that has been also from Charlotte's Web and other sources. But I think that 1 milligram of GW CBD may not be equivalent to a milligram of another, so it's very hard to take when you're switching batches and switching sources. So what the GRU study may find is a certain dose might be appropriate for the Epidiolex form of CBD, but it may not be appropriate for other forms or grown by other makers because they may have different conformation.
Right.
But fortunately, that data is growing, I guess, which is good to know, I guess.
Yeah, that's very good to know.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
can
Dr.
comment a little bit on that too. So the Epidiolex and Charlotte's Web is pretty much isolated CBD. There is no THC in it. So when you're using multiple compounds like this, you create the entourage effect that Sanjay Gupta spoke of in the CNN documentaries. So when you have multiple cannabinoids working together, you actually have to use less of the formula to achieve efficacy. So we achieve efficacy at much lower doses than some of the other manufacturers. So we're finding the patients are finding seizure control closer to 1 milligram per pound a day as opposed to 3 or 4 milligrams of CBD per pound.
Let's see. I think Dr. Park had one. Did you have one more question too first? Yep.
Business questions to you. I hope it's near soon the CBD approved by the FDA. Then side effects, which is 50% of THC, 50% of CBD, which is phase 3 study in U.S. 25 countries has been used at this moment, which is for the spasticity, pain, etc. Synthetic THC available already approved 30 years ago in the U.S.
Yeah, Marinol.
Yeah, Marinol. So all those is available near soon. Do you think your company has to be thinking about what direction you need to go?
We do. So right now I'm involved in research studies in New Zealand, Israel, and we just started a research study in Colorado with an Institute of Higher Learning to basically determine the safety. So GW is doing a great job with their clinical trials on efficacy, but we want to see the interactions with other pharmaceutical drugs. We know that CBD increases or slows down the metabolization of ONFI per se, and ONFI levels rise in the blood. So we're going about it as a safety study as opposed to an efficacy study. We know it works, but now we want to know what are the negative impacts on the body. Like, does CBD or naturally derived cannabis oils damage the liver? Do they damage the kidney? Do they interact and cause contraindications with other pharmaceutical drugs? So that's what we're looking at right now.
Hang on, Dr. Fitzgerald. I got one more question coming from Dr. Keenan or Smith.
Thank you. I have two questions, and they're more from the ag side of this. When you talk about growing it out in Colorado, in Georgia we have a seed law. So were you guys exempt from that in Colorado, or how did you work with that? And my second question is, if you use pesticides, what was it like from the feds and those label requirements? And if you didn't, I understand you wouldn't have that battle.
Yeah, no, that's a common issue. So with the seed issue, each state that has allowed hemp cultivation has written their own bill. So they wrote bills specific to their state. Kentucky was one of the states that I think they were trying to require that you obtain the seeds through a licensed source, because that's where the whole lawsuit came from when they tried to import it, and the DEA caught it at the airport, and the college in Kentucky actually sued the DEA and got their seeds released from the DEA. So they won the lawsuit. In Colorado, we don't have that requirement. The only requirement in Colorado is that the strain that we're growing is 0.3 THC or lower. So we can get the genetics wherever we want. And then the Department of Ag actually does random inspections. So they'll come out to your field, take a clipping off the plant of their choice without even warning you they're coming, and then they test it to make sure that you meet the requirements. So,
of the seed you say you have, that they run the lab test and say this is 0.3.
Correct.
You haven't strayed from your original seed. Okay.
Correct. And so if they come out and say you have something, I think if it's 0.5, they'll make you chop it. They'll chop it all down. So you'll lose your investment, your crop, everything. If it's above 1%, then you could actually face criminal prosecution. So they regulate it that way by surprise inspections. You have no way of knowing when they're coming, so it would really be a dumb gamble to try to put something in a hemp field that didn't qualify as hemp. And then with the pesticides, we everything that I use is OMRI listed, so it's certified organic. But there are companies in Colorado that we're going around using. I don't know if you're familiar with chemicals, but there's one called myclobutanol and naphthene, and it's the active ingredients in Eagle 20, which is really meant for lawn turf, to make your grass green. And people were using that in Colorado, and so a good friend of mine, we worked with the state to determine what pesticides needed to be banned, and we got quite a few pesticides banned from being used in Colorado. Industry was a little irritated with us, but we got it banned, and so now it's a requirement there that we have to test for the pesticides. Anything sold has to pass lab samples, lab tests.
And that's unique, just though, to pesticide use for that product in Colorado.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Keenan, I'm going to come right back to you. Dr. Fitzgerald had one more question.
It was a comment. And one of the things about protocols, you're right, there are well-done research studies that have data, but that's with an identified substance. So that when we're looking at how does Georgia figure out how to have identified substances and know exactly what the protocol should be for that.
Yeah, for that specific product.
Yes, exactly. Like, for example, there are lots of ways to treat hypertension. There are lots of pills to treat hypertension, but a dose of 25 milligrams is not the same from drug to drug.
Okay, good point. Director Keenan?
Thank you, sir. Did I understand that your position is that you can legally ship your product into Georgia?
Only the product that qualifies as hemp. We can't ship anything above 0.3 THC.
Okay. You're not going to arrest anybody here soon, are you?
Yeah, you're scaring me.
You are a pretty scary guy, too, So.
If you can legally move this into Georgia, why do you need to manufacture it in Georgia?
To get other cannabinoids. The Farm Bill only allows for THC limits of 0.3. Actually all of the families that have moved to Colorado from Georgia they're using THCA, and so I can't ship that. There's no loophole, there's no gray area, it's not ambiguous, it's flat out black and white, federally illegal to ship anything with above 0.3 THC. So unless I want to go to a federal correctional facility, I need to cultivate it in Georgia so I don't break any interstate commerce or drug trafficking laws.
Okay. One follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
When we have a change of administration, if a new administration came and decided they wanted to aggressively enforce all the federal laws on the books, what happens with the industry that's ongoing now?
They would have a very, very hard time putting the genie back in the bottle. There's thousands of these businesses nationwide, and if you look at liquor prohibition, alcohol prohibition, they tried to do the same thing. A couple of years later, they said, okay, we made a mistake, and now we're going to try to reverse it. It's impossible. And they'd have to lock up half of the country. The DEA and the administration does not have the manpower to enforce such a change, a drastic change in public policy.
Dr. Kenny, thank you. We're going to wrap it up with that. Some good questions. We got three other expert presenters. Let me just bring this issue home, and I think Director Keenan, your question was a good one. At the end of the day, to the members of this committee and to the members of my colleagues who have dealt with this extensively, this is a personal issue. This is an issue that affects the personal lives of our citizens, and that's why it was so urgent that we address this issue. Many of Georgia citizens had left our state, medical refugees, include some of them that are on that front row, were able to come home because of the legislation we passed. But there are others, directly because of the answer that Mr. Cranford gave, who need a higher level of THC that's permitted under Georgia law, but it cannot be shipped. And that family or citizen may not have the ability to go to another state, obtain the product, and come back to Georgia. There is one gentleman, Sebastian Cott, who's here today, who is waiting to come back home with little Jagger. There is another little boy by the name of Trip Oliver, who I've gotten to know very well, and our families have gotten to know very well, and his mom is out in Colorado with young Trip while the daddy is still here in Georgia, and he cannot come home because he needs and has used and seen success with THCA, which is not allowed under our Georgia law, but would be allowed if we cultivated it here in Georgia. So keep in mind, to the members of this commission, this is a personal issue that very directly affects the personal lives of our citizens, and that's why this work is so important. Mr. Cranford, you got any final comments?
No, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to spread some of this knowledge and talk about what's really going on in the industry.
Yeah, well, I know there's some families that are right behind you that are thankful every single day for the work that you've done, and so thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, our next presenter will be Mr. Jake Bergmann. Mr. Bergmann, if you'll come on up. Mr. Bergmann is CEO of Surterra Therapeutics, and I'll let you. Do you have a PowerPoint?
I do.
Okay. All right. You want to get that set up real quick? No. Now what do I do?
It'll come on, and then we can.
Mr. Bergmann, do you need audio on the presentation?
I don't need audio.
Okay. All right. When you get up and running, we'll. Why don't you, while you're getting that up and ready, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are too,
Sure.
And why you have an interest in this issue.
So, first of all, Mr. Chairman, Commission, thank you all very much for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak today. I'm Jake Bergmann, CEO of Surterra Holdings. I represent a team of people that we have assembled over the past 2 years, pharmacists, physicians, large-scale agricultural growers, who've all come together to create this company. And I'm very pleased with the opportunity to present to you what we are capable of doing. Brief background on how the company came to be. My background personally is an investment manager. I was looking around the country in kind of end of 2013 at the legalization movement happening in some of the states as an investment opportunity. And the truth is, we got out to California, Colorado, and we didn't really find any investments that we felt safe making. A lot of the industry was very young, very disorganized, and they stashed cash under the mattress. And so we felt like that wasn't a very safe or prudent use of our investor funds. The second thing we discovered, which I did not know when I started, was I thought that medical cannabis was essentially a ruse. It was the quote-unquote slippery slope to get to recreational. And you do see some of that on the West Coast. But what we quickly discovered was the mountain of research out there that supports cannabis as a therapeutic plant. There's a trend across the country moving towards all natural, all organic healthcare. We see a lot of moms who shift more towards essential oils, that type of thing. And in that world, cannabis is, the key plant. It offers the most potential therapeutic benefits. And the challenge, of course, is that it has been illegal under federal law. And so I think that what you're seeing with each of these states that come online and take the process Georgia is taking is demand from the people, right, who need these therapeutic benefits of the plant, pushing to create a regulatory structure that works for them where the federal government is not taking action yet. So that's a little bit of background on us, and I can answer questions about our team or anything all day long if you guys want to know.
Well, that's good enough. Why don't you go on into your presentation?
Yeah,
let's keep moving, and then we're sure we'll have some questions.
Presentations. And the important thing to note is we're a Georgia-based company. We're headquartered right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Our offices are at the Atlanta Tech Village in Buckhead. We operate almost exclusively in the southeastern states. We've worked with governments in Georgia, Florida, Texas, and Virginia. Our goal is to sell the Surterra branded products in the southeastern states. And I don't have control of the slides, so we'll just get through. This is an example of the products that we would produce in Georgia. These are, as you can tell, these are clearly pharmaceutical grade products. They have all the labeling standards you would expect to see in any FDA regulated product. It is not regulated by the FDA. It would be regulated by the state, but we would maintain those standards. Our primary product line, which is shown here, is all topical creams. These are, just as a side note, topical creams are a particularly effective way to treat a lot of conditions, whether it's arthritis or seizures, because they have almost zero psychoactive effect. You apply them to the skin, you don't ingest them, you don't inhale them. This is a picture of a facility in Canada. Actually, this is one of our Canadian partners. They have a license there. This is a good example of what a traditional facility, or you would expect to see. This is the same type of facility we're currently building in Florida, and is what we would build in Georgia if we had the ability to do so. This is an interior shot of the. Go ahead. That's an interior shot of the facility. You can see it's maintained. This is in Canada, so it's not quite the same, but essentially it's actually greater than USDA organic standards. But these are the same USDA organic standards you would expect from a pharmaceutical grade facility. You have your hairnets, lab coats. Everyone has to wash their feet prior to entry into the facility. And then you can also see just kind of up there in the middle there where all the plants are individually tagged and tracked. This is an extraction machine. The technology we use to extract the cannabinoids out of the cannabis plant is the same that you use to extract caffeine from coffee beans. It's supercritical CO2 extraction. It's a very simple process. It's been around for about 50 years. It's all organic, no butane or propane involved in the process. But that's only step one. That machine there would yield an oil. We then take that oil, put it through a chromatography process, and extract the individual cannabinoids, THC, CBD, THCA. We can even parse out some of the individual terpenes and flavonoids. And then as a kind of pharmaceutical grade product, we would recombine these into specific formulations so that we have the exact same product, same consistency that we sell every time. And I know one of the issues that comes up a lot is security. So this is a picture of some of the security features at that Canada facility. We think these are probably overkill, but this is kind of what's happening all over the country, and this is what we'll be doing in Florida and probably here in Georgia as well. The inventory room, you can see there on the left, it has a 4-inch thick steel door. Every door there is protected by thumbprint entry, so you can't steal someone's key card. You actually have to be there in person. We'll track every entry and exit of the employees. And then on the outside of the facility, you can see it in the original picture, but this is a good shot. In addition to having the chain link and barbed wire kind of fence surrounding the greenhouse, we actually have laser tripwires. So at night, if someone crosses the fence, it would set off the alarms and shut down the facility. Tracking is a key issue that comes up. We're using tracking technology that has been, state of the art in the hydroponic greenhouse industry. So in Holland and Canada, they've been growing crops in large-scale agricultural greenhouses for more than 50 years, and Prevent Technology is one of the best firms that provides tracking technology. What this will allow us to do is track every single employee. When they walk into the facility, we'll know they're there. When they walk up to a row of plants, we'll know they're there. When they walk into it and touch a specific plant, we have record of that. We also are on essentially computer, even on a cell phone, we get an iPhone app for this. We will track the exact amounts of light, of water, of nutrition supply to each plant throughout the process. We will maintain this in a database. These plants will go into extraction, and that will become a batch. We can track, and then the batch will go into individual products that are sold to patients. So if a patient calls with any type of complaint, like you mentioned with the compounding pharmacies, we can track that complaint, that batch number, all the way back to the employees, the nutrients, everything that went into that plant that went into the batch. And this may not be applicable for Georgia, but this is what we're having to do in Florida. Florida is requiring retail distribution. We originally had wanted to distribute through pharmacies. Unfortunately, the DEA regulations or the license they hold prevents them from carrying our products. So we had to create essentially our own pharmacy. This is essentially a boutique healthcare retail outlet. As you can see, this is not at all what you would imagine with like, purple haze or, some type of like coral reefer concept, right? This is
or what you're seeing in Denver.
Correct. This is very different than anything you'd see in Colorado. This is designed all about patients, all about education, and it's meant to be open and inviting. All the product is kept behind closed doors in the back. So you would come out, you would talk with a pharmacist. It's run by a pharmacist, and we have private consultation rooms as well. And then we would have an employee go get your product from the back, hand it to you, and you'd head out the door. And I'm sure everyone here is probably somewhat familiar with the federal rules, but I thought I'd give a brief overview. Currently, the federal policy is operated under 3 key guidances and 1 amendment to a bill. The Cole Memo is what's most broadly known as the one that all the states operate under, all the businesses operate under as legal cannabis businesses. Interestingly, since the Cole Memo, you've seen the FinCEN guidance come out. The FinCEN guidance allows banks to legally take cash from state legalized cannabis businesses. However, there are significant regulatory hurdles. They have a series of red flags they have to track, quarterly audits. It's a very expensive process for the banks. We do know so far 21 banks have gone through this process. And then finally, the most interesting one is the H.O.P.E amendment, which was attached to the federal omnibus bill that passed in December of 2014. It was the $1 trillion spending bill. And it prevented the Department of Justice from spending federal dollars to prosecute state legal cannabis businesses or cannabis businesses in the states. And I'm going to come back to that in 1 minute. This is an overview of polling support in the southeastern states. As you can see, there's, except for Kentucky, everyone's over 70% support. I don't know of a single political issue that gets this much broad-based support. Also interesting to note that Florida, which is in the process of licensing organizations right now to do this, is at, I think, 88, and Georgia is the next highest at 84%. This is an overview of a couple of the models that we've operated in. The Florida-New York regulatory model is the one that you've probably heard the most about because Florida is just below us. But it is a very limited licensure model with significant state control. Both states have limited it to 5 licenses, a maximum of 5. And these are states of 20 million residents, so they're very large states. This has the effect of essentially a very high barrier to entry. You only have very professional, highly capitalized businesses engaged in this. New York, they actually set the monthly price for cannabis products. Florida is a red state, so they have open competition. They also require testing of all the products, so they'll ensure consistent product formula and quality. The key risk, which you may have also noted with this regulatory structure, is litigation delays. We have seen this play out in Florida, and it's taken them about 2 years to get through the passing of a bill to actually licensing groups such as ours. The other model that you see come up in the South a lot, and this is I'm using Maryland and Louisiana as an example here. Virginia is also looking at a similar process, but this is where you have a state-managed production and distribution. Essentially, the producers are state-funded, state-controlled entities, similar to like the ABC system in alcohol. And you would partner with outside firms to run the production and an extraction process through an RFP process. This has the advantage of ensuring consistent formulas and quality through state-verified testing. It also provides the highest level of protection under federal policies. The important note I want to make about the H.O.P.E amendment is that the DOJ did recently issue guidance on this amendment, which said that the way they interpret the amendment is that it protects the states, not private businesses, from the DOJ's prosecution. So I think that you'll see in the South a lot more states will move down this path, at least until you see a new direction in federal policy. And finally, our recommendations for Georgia. Every state's different. It comes down to essentially what the legislature wants to do, what you feel most comfortable with in the state of Georgia. I think that the models that make the most sense for the people I've spoken with here are either a state-managed model or a limited licensure model like Florida and New York. It's important that you think through and you regulate all the aspects of production. This is not just about cultivation. The much more important part is the extraction and the formulation of your products, and then, of course, the dispensing of those products to patients. So we encourage them to regulate each of those aspects. And then one of the lessons that we've kind of learned and that we would recommend if you're going down a limited licensure model, Texas passed a law very similar to Florida's. And rather than having a hard limit of 5 licenses, that was the maximum, right, that creates this kind of fight among the producers, they have a minimum, right? And so they have a minimum of 3 licenses they will issue by September of 2017. And it's essentially based, if they're going to issue additional licenses, it would be based on market or patient needs. And then finally, I do have to mention that, a note on there about vertical integration and state-verified testing. We're accustomed to this model. I think this is what's going to work out best in Georgia from a safety, quality, and security standpoint. If you have your cultivation, extraction, and compounding and packaging all in the same facility, it's very easy to keep tabs on everything and control it. So that would be our recommendation here. And then the state can also come in and essentially verify the testing process. The equipment to do the kind of type of testing that we have to do to make our products is $1 million or so. And so I think that we would have essentially state officials trained on that equipment who would come in and test our products right alongside us. And then these are extra slides. I just put them up here in case there are any questions about the medical application of cannabinoids, but I'm finished and happy to answer questions.
Okay. Mr. Bergmann, I tell you, that's good information. You're going to get that to me by e-method so that I can get this to our committee?
Yep. I believe that we emailed it already.
Okay. All right. So we'll get that to you. I've got a handful of questions, and then we'll open up the committee. Obviously, you know a lot about this, and boy, it's impressive watching the security measures which I think are going to be crucial to law enforcement and DAs in our state. Make sure we got security measures in place. I want to ask you some questions about the business model. So it appears that you're kind of saying there are really kind of two models out there, and this is the purpose of this committee, is to make a recommendation to the governor. One model where it's a limited licenses and it's kind of from seed to sale. Surterra would be granted a license and you grow it, process it, and distribute it at retail centers. That's one model. The other model, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that where the state would control it, and in effect, Georgia would engage Surterra to grow it, process it, and then the state would become the owner of the final product and have geographic distributions points where the state would provide it to its citizens. Is that not correct? Is that the two models that you're saying? That
those are the two models I mentioned today. I think those are the most applicable in the South. Of course, you have the Colorado and California models, which are wide open, but I think those are the most two applicable to what we're doing here.
Okay, all right. If those are the two models, and if that's probably the path that this commission is going to make a recommendation one way or the other to the governor, let's pick them apart a little bit. In the first model, where it's just a limited number of licenses, can you give us some details of how much capital would be required to open a seed to sale production in that model?
So
just a range.
Sure, and this depends greatly upon essentially the number of conditions that you would expect us to be creating products for. If it is just pediatric epilepsy, I believe it's somewhere between $2 and $3 million. It's very what we consider a low capital expenditure number. If you're doing, a statewide cover every condition, you're talking about 15, 20, 25, a very large number.
All right, well, let me ask it specifically for what Georgia law is right now. Mm-hmm. If there was no change to the medical conditions or to the THC limits, and it's only for cannabis oil, one, does that business model work? And what is the capital investment for something like that?
The capital investment would be approximately, we estimate, $5 million. And yes, I believe the business model would work.
There would be enough demand for a business to come in and make an investment in that type of model.
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but if you're talking about just epilepsy before you add in cancer or other serious conditions, I think that there are 50, 100,000 Georgians that are affected, and that's more than sufficient to run a relatively large-scale business.
Okay. Then move to the second model. If it was a model that was state-controlled, where the state engaged growers and processors, is there enough potential value for an investor to come in and engage with the state to produce that product, even though they're not providing it to the user eventually? They're just providing it to the state to provide to the user. Does that make sense, what
Sure.
I'm asking?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been prepared to do this for a while.
Yeah, okay. Other questions for Mr. Bergmann? Yep. Ms. Reese, Dr. Reese, here we go. 23, is that right? Yep.
Okay, my question is, you mentioned pharmacists in Florida, which I was excited to hear.
Sure.
I know federally it's class 1. How are the pharmacists? Do they touch the product? Are they just doing more counseling with the patients? What's the role in Florida for the pharmacist?
So sure, there are two roles actually. One is in the actual production. We have pharmacists on our team who are part of the company.
Okay.
So they're not even using their DEA license anymore, but they are maintaining their Florida pharmacist license, and they'll be helping us manufacture and compound these products. And secondly, and you actually saw this in the Connecticut law that passed, they required pharmacists to be the managers of the retail facilities. And we would also be doing this in Florida. Now, this is not a requirement in Florida. It's something we're doing voluntarily. But I think they're the best people to do this. And in that case, too, they would also not be utilizing a DEA license. They're making a conscious choice to work in this type of industry, these products, versus pharmaceutical products.
Dr. Reese, do you see a concern there if in that type of structure where pharmacists would be working?
Rick Allen, I'm going to direct that to you. Which I know his opinion on it, but just from a legal standpoint,
Georgia, you would have a significant problem with the way the laws are written now.
Okay.
They would not be allowed to do such, regardless of a DEA permit.
Even if they were not being engaged in their capacity as a pharmacist, but more of a counselor type even then?
You're going to open them up for possible prosecution.
I mean, that's almost like saying, okay, a pharmacist can't go work in a dietary supplement store as an employee.
Not quite. No, that's different.
Okay.
So I mean, I admire what they're trying to do, but you just couldn't walk in and do it here without some tweaking.
Unless some change in the law.
Right.
Okay.
Are any of the federal pieces that you talked about, I'm just trying to think right offhand, some of the federal protection that's going on, if that would apply to the pharmacists as well? I'm not sure, but
the same protections that apply to all the private companies or to the state, if it were a state-based model, would apply to the employees.
Okay.
So yes, they run the same, have the same liabilities and risk as anyone who gets involved. You have conflicting state and federal laws, but I think that if you're covered under the state law, most people believe that's sufficient.
Senator Miller, Doctor, I get you.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate your presentation and sharing the information with us. Clarify for me how far down the road you are in Florida. The storefront looked like a concept. Are there actual stores open?
Correct. So Florida just we applied for 4 licenses in Florida on July 8th, and they are currently reviewing the applications and will make license awards. So we have secured retail locations, which would be built upon receiving a license.
Okay, so you're just before getting licensing and opening in Florida for business.
Correct.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much. I was unclear how far through the process you were. Thank you.
And then how long before? So you're expecting to be selling to the public when in Florida?
That is a very difficult judgment to make. It's based on whenever the license awards are made. But after license awards are made, you have 200 and I want to say 85 days to begin dispensing to the public.
Okay, let me follow up on that question then. If in Georgia we were to enact something at the end of next legislative session signed by the governor, say in April, license issued soon after, from the time you're issued a license to the time you're selling to the public is what time frame?
That depends on how fast the rulemaking process goes and the licensure process. In Florida, that took quite a while. Some states are faster, some states are slower. Once we have a license, we have the authority to begin essentially construction of a facility and cultivation of plants and processing of medicines. 6 months. Okay. We can probably do it a little bit faster if we begin construction sooner.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up, so I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. So as a follow-up, your process in Florida is that you're growing, but you're not growing yet in Florida, or you are?
No, we're not allowed to possess cannabis materials until we receive the license and are granted a cultivation authorization.
And then after that, you'll be 6 months away from being open.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Dr. Murphy.
Yeah, I appreciate, again, you presenting this information. I think it's very interesting how you put all this together. I have one question. You mentioned that your products currently are topical and that you've got clinical trials that are ongoing or that are about to be ongoing. Obviously, as a gastroenterologist, I have interest in some of the things that are apart from the pediatric epilepsy thing that prompted the passage of HB1. Do you have any commentary about the clinical trials you have ongoing or things you have planned in the future for other indications, for example, Crohn's disease or some of the other things that are
Sure. Right now, we're primarily focused on 3, maybe 4 different conditions, but 3 primarily, and those are epilepsy, cancer, and pain management. Pain management is a very broad category. We're specifically focused on arthritis. And what we're doing right now is we've done some limited trials in California on essentially the topical application of cannabinoids, both THC, CBD, and for seizures and Parkinson's.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Follow up on that. Looking at Georgia's law, we have 8 medical conditions right now. I think you're familiar with those. Are we missing something?
I think the answer came from behind me, and that answer was yes. That's what I was going to say. I'll say consult the patients here. We've been looking at, there's a great study that was done by Ethan Russo, formerly of GW Pharma, in 2011 on the different, it was essentially a catalog of all the different uses of cannabinoids and terpenes and other compounds in the plant, right? And the list is incredible. We are working through a list of potential formulations and products we want to develop. It will probably take us and the rest of the industry years to go through all the potential applications here. The cannabis plant has been described as a treasure trove of therapeutical compounds, and that's true. It's going to take years, but we're focusing on what we can do to provide. I think the most serious conditions first.
Okay, but if I had to put you on the spot, which I'm gonna, and give me 2 or 3 that we need to make sure we include if we give some strong consideration to other conditions in the future, what
Sure.
would be the 2 or 3?
I mean, the most serious, I believe, are, and everyone behind me is going to have different opinions, and I would
I'm
consult
interested in
them.
your opinion.
I think the biggest ones would be epilepsy, cancer, and then
I'm talking about ones that are other than the 8 that we already have.
That we have. I'd have to consult. It'd be hard to pick.
Okay, I'll let you off the hot seat then. Before I let you go, Brian Teague, Governor's Executive Council, came in, and so before we get reshuffling for our next speaker, let's just stay put for a second. Mr. Teague, obviously this commission is the Governor's commission, appointed by him, and obviously my colleagues know that anything that's recommended by this commission, and even potentially supported by the House or the Senate, unless it gets that final signature of the governor, really does not move us down the road toward finding a good solution. So would you mind, are you comfortable sharing today kind of where the governor is? Let's see, what number are you, 16? Yep. Where the governor is. And
I didn't know how to control my voice over here.
Yeah. So why don't you just, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, I apologize for being behind. I was with the governor for the last hour on another matter, and I had the benefit of talking to him briefly before I came over here to kind of get his perspective on kind of where things are at. And we've met with Chairman Peake on this issue, and the governor's very comfortable with where we've come so far. He has a cautious approach as to where we go in the future, and we're very comfortable with the format now where the state would be the one involved through our university systems and any kind of a research capacity and how we would deliver a product that would go out and be used by people here in Georgia. We would like to continue down that path. We don't have a hard line approach there, but that's where he's comfortable at right now. But we're also very looking forward to hearing where this commission goes and what recommendations we might have, and keep an open mind. The governor's very interested in exploring what other states have gone through. We know we hear, I guess the most public thing we hear is out of Colorado, and we're not comfortable with the direction they've taken. But that's not saying that we're not comfortable with a different approach that is more, that's better managed. And right now we're just using the oils, and that's where we're limited to. And but the governor's supportive of us, of people in this commission going and visiting other states and what they're doing. I know we understand there are a number of states and with facilities out there that grow the product, and so we're very supportive of continuing more of a watch and see if we can't find what's working out there in other states as opposed to trying to recreate the wheel here.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Teague. I appreciate it. Any questions for Mr. Teague? Mr. Bergmann, thank you. We appreciate the work you're doing, and look forward to maybe seeing if there's potential opportunities for your firm in the future. No guarantee of anything, at this point. Absolutely. So, but we appreciate your interest and appreciate you being here.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, we got 2 more presenters, and next one, Mr. Bob Blake, who is the president of Oregonians for Better Health. And while he's coming up, I'm going to share a little bit of information on him too. I think we only have 1 mic, so you'll have to read. Sure,
we'll share.
Mr. Blake came to my attention. Dr. Murphy, you may know, I don't know if you know Stephen Morris, who's the head of the largest gastro group in the country, I think. Is that right? And he had a high level of interest in how he could help Crohn's disease patients. And what's the other diagnosis? And so he recommended Mr. Blake. I guess maybe they had some acquaintances in the past, and so Mr. Blake, you come highly recommended from a very esteemed physician in our state, and so we'll look forward to your presentation. And why don't you tell us who you are and who you got with you, and then we'll ask some questions as well too.
Thank you very much, Chairman Peake. My name is Bob Blake, and with me is Ken White. Ken's a master's degree chemist and an extractor of cannabis. We operate in the state of Oregon, so we flew in this week. Also with me as a patient, I thought it'd be important to hear from a patient and her direct experience using cannabis oils. What we found in Oregon is the patients are the most important voice that is often not heard. And so I want you to hear that.
Tell me your name.
Ashley Lovely. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Ashley Phelps Lovely. What I did, instead of doing a PowerPoint or a slideshow, is we prepared binders for you. And we'll give you the electronic version because, at least in my presentation, I've given you links to virtually all the Oregon laws, administrative rules. It's extensive. I am actually a recent resident of Oregon in the last 4 years. I actually reside in Hickory, North Carolina. And I got to Oregon because I was in the anesthesia business, and I run a national anesthesia services company. I service gastroenterology practices. In fact, Dr. Murphy, I almost serviced your practice. But the most important thing about Oregon is it's an open state. They just passed recreational. We're going through this change that you've read about in Colorado and Washington. It is very regulated, but we don't know what the regulation's exactly going to be. But we have had medical cannabis legislation on the books with the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act since 1998, so almost 20 years. And it is a very robust industry. What is the most interesting aspect of the Oregon program, which will be very different from what will evolve in most other states, it is 100% patient-driven. The patient owns the plants, not the grower. There are no corporate entities per se in Oregon in the medical cannabis program, although companies that I own and operate are corporations. We contract with individual patients who control all of the production. To date in the medical cannabis field, there is no regulation of processing and extraction at all. However, what has evolved is laboratory testing, so that every product sold, produced and sold by batch is tested for pesticides, mold, mildew, and all the other impurities that would be important to test. In 2013 is when I really entered the industry in Oregon because they passed House Bill 3460, which allowed for the lawful sale in the state of Oregon of medical cannabis. To give you an idea of how open the system is, and the desire of the Oregon legislature was to more or less control the black market. We are a huge exporter of cannabis in the United States. Thousands of pounds of cannabis are produced and exported out of Oregon, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know by who, I don't know where, but that is generally what is known. And what we've tried to do in the state is to be a large tent and include all of the producers and cultivators. So we have thousands upon thousands of marijuana cultivators, individual patients. They are all registered with the Oregon Health Authority under the Public Health Division, Dr. Fitzgerald. It's a very robust program, and the medical marijuana dispensaries are also regulated by the Public Health Division in another division, but not under the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program, which is in charge of patient registry. The Oregon Medical Marijuana Program is 100% funded by fees. There are no taxes. Veterans and other people on low income will pay $20 for a card, and then others will pay up to $250 for an annual registration. In order to get a card, much like is in Georgia, you must have a physician, MD, or DO recommendation. There's no other way to get a card. Possession, they've decriminalized it under the recent House Bill 3400, but possession is 1.5 pounds per individual. Under recreational, it will be different. And under recreational, the regulatory agency will be the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. That law was passed, essentially the Oregon voters on November 4th, 2014 approved Measure 91 by a greater than 57 to 43% vote. And we now, as of July 1, 2015, every Oregonian may grow 4 plants per household. So everybody in Oregon can grow marijuana or cannabis. It's a very legal, you might say, being from Hickory, North Carolina, which is more akin to Georgia, it is the Wild West. It's very different.
And that's not coming to Georgia, just so you'll know.
We understand. I understand.
So if you'll help us by help us learn from the medical cannabis side of it.
You absolutely can. The medical side is highly regulated. Now, what I want to speak about, and I'm going to keep it short because you have a lot in my binder here, in our binder for you. Ken will talk to you a little bit about the extraction process, much like Mr. Bergmann and others. Mr. Cranford talked about their extraction process. And Ms. Lovely will talk about what her experience was with her Hodgkin's lymphoma. I particularly got involved because of the medical research. I saw an anomaly. I had a dear friend of mine who got cancer, and one of my nurse anesthetists said, have you ever heard of Phoenix Tears or Rick Simpson oil? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And this is February 2013. Since then, I've spent thousands of hours researching the available research, whether it be stuff done by GW Pharmaceuticals, but mostly work that really was begun by Dr. Mechoulam in Israel, Raphael Mechoulam, who has also been referenced here. I would suggest that I took a chance. And in Oregon, we make oil and we have cancer patients come to us. I also would like to go after ALS because I'm absolutely convinced of the medicinal benefit, the therapeutic benefit of cannabis. So, Dr. Park, are they formal clinical trials? No. Because of federal laws, you may have a very unique opportunity here with the Regents University, but Oregon and OHSU, the Oregon Health Sciences University, is not involved. In fact, this is a very, very private opportunity run by the private sector trying to heal people. And so that's what I did. I looked at this opportunity and I said, if it works on mice, why aren't we doing it in humans? And if you read all the literature, it says in the last part of the abstract, we should pursue this with in vivo trials on humans or pursue more medical research. Virtually all of the medical research related to cannabis. Then I recognized the hypocrisy. So being in the business of healthcare for 30 years, I said, something's not right here. So then I got to do the test case. We've done dosing. We have 6 cancer patients who accept it. Every other patient who chose not to pursue our protocol, they only come to us generally with stage 4 cancer. So they're giving weeks or months to live. Every other patient has passed away, ladies and gentlemen. The only ones who live in remission are the 6 that we put on trial. It's powerful. It brings me to tears. At first I thought it was a miracle. I thought it was crazy. But not 6 for 6. Every time I speak to a physician, oh, it's anecdotal. Well, we have documented medical evidence that this patient had stage 4 lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, neuroendocrine cancer, breast cancer, and brain cancer, a large golf ball-sized brain tumor on a brainstem, gone in 10 weeks. Extensive cancer, extensive dosing of medical cannabis. Here's the reality. You have to take so much cannabis to get rid of it that we know of, based on research, that you sleep for 10 weeks, 12 to 15 hours a day. When we are sick, what do? We sleep. This cannabis makes you rest. It allows your body to concentrate on what it does. And you will read in the literature, and you will read more about the endogenous cannabinoid system and our enteric nervous system and how it affects in terms of gastroenterology and other things. These are very powerful concentrates, and you will sleep. We do not use we use generally a 3 to 5 to 1, not a 30 to 1 mix of CBD and other cannabinoids to the THC psychoactive. The literature, at least with cancer, is pretty compelling because most of the research on cancer has been done with high THC, either synthetic agonists of the CB1 and CB2 receptors are actually with synthetic cannabinoids themselves. And that's where a lot of the literature, because why? In this country, you have to use synthetics. So if you did the ALS research with Dr. Carter out of the University of Washington and Dr. I forget her name out of Temple University with her rat studies, they never used cannabis. They used agonists or promoters of the receptor to unlock it, or they used synthetic cannabinoids. But again, they were healed. The dispensary system, to give you an idea of how wide open the dispensary system is in Oregon, and again, Representative Peek and others, you may not want it. You wanted us to talk about what Oregon is.
Sure, or at least the infrastructure, what works and what doesn't work from a medical cannabis standpoint.
We have right now in Bend, Oregon, where we have a dispensary. It's a resort city akin to Aspen, outdoor sports, winter and summer. 80,000 people. There are 23 dispensaries. In Portland, a town, a city of 900,000, 150 plus dispensaries. They range from very fancy, very clean, very much like the Surterra presentation, to somewhere where you would not feel comfortable. That's the candid assessment. Ours is an old house, and you come in and it's a very restful, sort of nirvana-like place. That's pretty much what it is. It's very professional. Ideally, I would like to hire pharmacists. I consult with pharmacists and doctors all the time. I don't do anything without consulting with physicians. In my part of the presentation, I can close by talking about our cultivations, and we have multiple farms, and there are large farms, 40-acre, planned farms. But under recreational as well as under medical, there are strict controls as to the size of the cultivation.
The greenhouses, or the
greenhouses, indoor facilities, as well as pure outdoor. We have some of the best outdoor growing of cannabis in the nation. Humboldt County and other places in California, as well as they call it the Green Triangle down in Southern Oregon. It is fabulous, and they have experienced growers. Virtually all of the cannabis that is used in the medical side that I'm exposed to is 100% organic. We don't use pesticides or anything. However, that's not to say that there are not aggressive cultivators who will do whatever it takes to produce a yield. Extraction is heretofore, until very recently, under House Bill 3400, which just got signed by the governor in July of this year, primarily they're not regulated until very recently. It's been an underground industry, creating cannabis oils on behalf of patients. I prepared a matrix for you about what I would look for if I was a regulator. And I do sit on the Rules Advisory Committee in the state of Oregon, to the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, and I'm on the Growth Subcommittee. So I advise, we develop recommendations for the state of what type of cultivation, how to manage the cultivations, so on and so forth, how to manage pesticides, seeds, how to track from seed, if you will, from production to sale. But if you were going, I rated 10 critical success factors here. And Oregon, if you force ranked each critical success factor from 1 to 5, you would have a total score of 50. I rank Oregon 31 out of 50.
Why don't you give us the top 3 or 4 that are really crucial?
Quality, laboratory testing, access, affordability. It's the same as healthcare, cost, quality, access. And you break it down from there. It's very important. Insurance coverage would be nice. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Ken. He'll speak for 2, 3, 4 minutes, and then Ashley. And we're here to always be a resource for you. I don't mind. I fly back and forth the country every 2 weeks. I don't mind coming to Georgia.
Okay. We always love folks coming to Georgia. So, Mr. White, thank you for being here. Why don't you give us your testimony?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'd like to start out by speaking on the quality of extracts and the starting material that goes into those. Just like any other drug, purity is of utmost importance, and cannabis is no exception for that. Any addition of pesticides, foliar sprays, or chemical additives during the growth process or cultivation process can be carried through in these extractions. Additionally, bacteria or mold or mildew can produce mycotoxins, which can also be they can be neurological toxins or can be carcinogenic. That's why it's extremely important that lab testing be enforced for any cannabis product that goes out to any patients. Testing for these chemicals. I know right now, as far as Oregon stands, we do test for the presence of mold or mildew. There are, maybe some cultivators that are, less than ethical that may take a strain of cannabis that they've grown that may have tested positive for mold or mildew. And they obviously cannot sell that flower to a patient, but because as far as testing procedures are now, there are no tests that actually test for these toxins that are produced by the mold or mildew. So if they go through the extraction process, they can essentially sell that, albeit unethically, as in its extracted form, and it still may contain some of these compounds such as mycotoxins. It's our recommendation that all cannabis be cultivated organically into organic certifications. We'll talk a little bit on the extraction process right now. The whole purpose of doing the extraction is to create a higher purity product. And once you have this high purity product, it's much easier to have to administer a precise dosage to the patient. Most extraction is done using a closed loop system, which is essentially a solvent reservoir that transfers the solvent to an extraction vessel that contains the actual cannabis flower, a collection vessel, and a solvent recovery system, so you recycle your solvent. Open blasting or open extraction should not be allowed, because not only is it bad for the environment, but it's also potentially dangerous or harmful to the extractor or personnel operating the equipment. There are two main types of extractions that are used in Oregon right now. The first being liquid hydrocarbon, that is butane or propane as the solvent. The other is supercritical carbon dioxide or liquid CO2. Both techniques have benefits and drawbacks. I would say for liquid hydrocarbon extracts, we've seen that they produce a broader spectrum of chemicals that are extracted from the plant that are medicinally valuable. Specifically terpene content, which has been shown more and more to improve the efficacy of the cannabinoids themselves. The drawback to hydrocarbon extraction is that the solvent itself in high enough concentrations can be toxic. So it's crucial that laboratory testing verify that there is minimal residual solvent, and state agencies should do toxicological studies to determine the appropriate residual parts per million, so to speak, of the solvent.
And to the members of the committee, I know a lot of this is highly technical, maybe going over most of our heads. The extraction process is important for safety measures, safety methods, and for purity methods as well too. You don't want to have an environment where all of a sudden there's a huge big explosion because you're extracting the product.
Correct.
So you may want to. Some of that may be a little more technical than we need to know, but so keep going. So.
Okay. What's that? Sure. Like as you said, another drawback of the hydrocarbon is that it is explosive. Although, as long as the proper precautions are taken, that there's no atmospheric oxygen present, that prevents any chance of explosions or fires. With CO2, it is completely non-toxic, and it's such a volatile or such a low boiling point compound that essentially none of the carbon dioxide is left over in the extraction. What we've seen from our tests is that they actually contain less of the terpene content, which, as I said, improves the efficacy of the cannabinoids themselves. From a safety standpoint, both systems can be operated and run successfully and safely. It is my recommendation that if Georgia decides to go this route, that there be certification courses and safety courses that any extraction lab or processing laboratory undergoes or has to pass the certification in order to process material. Another big one is lab testing. This is probably the most important part of all, because we need to guarantee that we are getting patients quality products. testing labs should always be testing for residual pesticides and microbial content. That's the bacteria, mold, and mildew, like I said. They should be testing for heavy metals, for pests and foreign matter. They should be testing for residual solvents such as butane or propane or ethanol if it's an alcohol extraction or something along those lines, as well as the purity and potency, so the actual ratio of cannabinoids that are contained within that flower or that extract or whatever the product might be, as well as the terpene content such as myrcene or limonene or these compounds that assist the cannabinoids in their function. And finally, I'd like to touch a little bit on the labeling requirements. The idea is to have a labeling system that conveys all of the necessary information to the patient without being excessive beyond the patient's understanding. These would be the name of the medicine, the actual cannabinoid content in milligrams, the mass of the total product. That way the patient knows what the actual purity is. Must contain a lab test identification number and the date of when the lab test was conducted, and most importantly, a child warning to ensure that no children ingest any of these products.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate that pretty good expert input, and it is important, and I can guarantee you that as we go down this path, we're going to, lab testing in particular is going to be a crucial part. Make sure that if we go down that path, that what we provide to Georgia citizens is amply tested. So, Ms. Lovely, yeah, floor is yours. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Mm-hmm. I was diagnosed with stage 3B Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2004 at the age of 13. I had an inoperable tumor in my neck and chest. During my chemotherapy treatments, I was prescribed Marinol, a synthetic form of THC commonly used for nausea and vomiting. Medication worked better for me than any of the medications I was taking to manage side effects of chemotherapy. Without this medication during my chemotherapy and radiation treatments, I would have not have had the strength to continue treatments and achieve remission. Following the birth of my second child in 2012, I started having symptoms of neuropathy, headaches, loss of appetite, dental problems, female health issues, and overall increase of pain and fatigue. My body was slowly breaking down due to the long-term damage from cancer treatment. I started with narcotic pain medication as prescribed for pain management. I knew the risks of narcotics, but I didn't feel like I had any other options. Over time, my quality of life decreased and my pain increased. I switched to non-narcotic pain medications and still could not get any relief. I made a choice to get my Oregon medical marijuana card after a routine visit with my oncologist. My oncologist is very supportive of this approach. After a short time of switching to medical cannabis, my pain decreased, appetite returned, and overall mental health improved. Most importantly, my quality of life improved dramatically. I'm no longer masking my symptoms. Medical cannabis works with my body to repair the damage that has been done, among other things. In April of this year, I had a visit with my oncologist. During the exam, he found that I had a large lymph node in my neck that was affecting my tonsil. I had a steroid treatment, but the node was unresponsive. I decided to explore my options. I have 2 children. I'm a single mom. The idea of chemotherapy terrified me. I started doing research and found information about cannabis concentrate oils. I was inspired, and I sought guidance, which was very hard to find. There was not a physician telling me where to go pick up my prescription, or a pharmacist to go over the medication with me and tell me how to take it, or insurance to cover it. So I went to a registered Oregon Medical Cannabis Dispensary, talked to the owner, and talked about my neck lesion and possible medical cannabis therapies. After some consultation and review of medical cannabis options, I started a low dose of cannabis oil concentrates with both high THC and CBD. The only side effect I experienced was sleepiness, which leveled out every few days. Then I would slowly increase my dose, eventually using it up to 5 times per day, about 1.5 grams at my highest dose. 10 weeks later, I returned to my oncologist for a checkup, and the node lesion was gone. The only thing that I was doing differently was ingesting the cannabis oil concentrates. I've now slowly decreased my dose. I stay on a low maintenance dose, which I plan to continue. Medical cannabis oils have worked better than any other medication or combination of medications that I've taken in my life, including the Marinol. Today in Oregon, I can walk into a medical dispensary and purchase my medicine. My heart goes out to those who have to break laws, travel across the country, and cannot afford to obtain something that will most likely save their lives. After my experience with cannabis concentrate oils, I started meeting people who are interested in the same thing. They're medical cannabis business owners who want to make a difference and patients that need guidance. I work on call in the mental health field with a background in addiction and recovery. I also work for the American Cancer Society as a hairstylist specializing in wigs. On my free time, I volunteer as a resource for the Cancer Center at my local hospital to guide patients interested in medical cannabis. I connect patients with growers and medical cannabis dispensaries. I answer questions from physicians and patients. The things that I have learned while working with patients have inspired me to do my own research and guide patients where there's a lack of resources. It takes courage to step out and say that I want to try something different, and it takes courage for physicians to speak up in front of their peers and take a risk to say that cannabis concentrates are saving lives. I'm excited to lead a generation that does not have to watch people around them die from cancer. There's a need for access to quality medical cannabis concentrate oils that are affordable. I hope that someday patients have the freedom to stay in their home state and acquire it legally and locally. I'm here today because patients are surviving, patients are speaking, and we have a powerful message of hope. Medical cannabis does work to cure cancer, or at least put that cancer into remission.
Ms. Lovely, thank you. Appreciate you. No, it takes a lot of courage to talk about the personal struggles that one faces on a daily basis, no matter what those personal struggles are. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing your story. Members of the Commission, there are questions for the three Oregonians here who came a long way to be with us. Yeah, Mr. Rickman. Yep, there we go.
Thank you for being here. If I understand right, and this is for you, sir,
yes, sir.
What you're saying is not that, because I think before today what I've always followed is that there's relief from nausea, there's pain relief. It sounds like what you're saying is that you truly believe that cannabis actually has an effect on the cancer. Is that what you're...
I will bet you any amount of money, and you will lose.
Well, you got more than me, so...
Not necessarily.
No, the DA's just got a raise in our state. I remember correctly.
It does. I will say one thing, though. You said it was an anti-emetic and anti-nausea medicine. There's a lot of literature out there, though, that also shows that excessive cannabis use by people who may be normal but take too much turns them into a hyperemetic state where they can't stop vomiting. And there's a lot of literature out there. So it is very powerful. Yes, it is an anti-emetic, and if it does get rid of tumors, it might do other things as well. In the case of ALS, I believe it goes back across the presynaptic, it goes back across the synapse to the presynaptic axon, and I believe it shuts down glutamate production, which is the neurotransmitter that is likely the major cause of ALS.
How would you, obviously one of the things that the members of the commission have paid attention to was also the Journal of the American Medical Association, the recent study, I'm thinking about 8 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, that would seem to go completely contrary to that. And that's not I'm not trying to start a debate. On the commission, we're faced with wonderful stories at times of things like this, and then you turn around and when we get to the hard science, you're sometimes faced with a different, it's a struggle to try to figure out how to reconcile those.
Mr. Rickman, the science is emerging. Israel is putting hundreds of millions of dollars a year in. GW Pharmaceuticals is too. But Israel will prove it out in the next 10 years. I believe that medical cannabis, it's a pretty strong statement, but I believe it will be the single greatest advance in modern medicine. I truly believe that. And I'm a guy who works with doctors, but I also know I've spoken to tens and tens of doctors. If you ask a doctor what a cannabinoid is, most don't even know what it is. Our traditional medical school education doesn't teach this. So the science in this country is way behind. And the medical societies are very against medical cannabis. And why? We all are parents. We've all potentially had children or have been exposed to children who have had cannabis, and we've seen potentially the negative effects of cannabis, and it scares us to death as parents. And physicians too. There are clearly negative effects. But you know, the people have voted in certain states, and I wasn't one who voted for recreational in Oregon, but it exists.
Thank you.
Dr. Whitmore, do you have a question? Remind me which number you are down there, sorry.
I just wondered, clarification. So there are data in the standard medical literature about cannabinoids having anti-proliferative effects on cancer cells, very much so. And we are quite interested in discussion with GW Pharmaceuticals about running a cancer trial here for children. But one of the questions I had was, what is the ratio of CBD to THC that you think is most effective anecdotally against the cancer?
I'll let Ken and me both give the answer. We think it's 5 to 1.
CBD to THC. Okay.
Or other cannabinoids to THC.
Okay. And so then there would be a down, sort of a negative point about having a highly purified amount, and it might be better to be a more endogenous mixture. Is that correct?
Explain for us non-physicians. Explain what she just said. So.
Oh, sorry.
We believe in the phytocannabinoids, the whole plant.
Yes.
And when you start recombining it like Surterra does or anybody else does to get that pure, it is exactly 98.7%. I think we're losing something of the whole plant. And to recreate the exact plant every time is something that chemists can talk about a little bit better than I can.
I think in regards to purification, I think the point of that is to make it a reproducible dosage. I agree with Mr. Blake that having a broad spectrum of cannabinoids and terpenoids in your medicine actually makes it more efficient as a medicine and greater activity at the endocannabinoid system. But I think the purpose of individually purifying the individual cannabinoids such as THC, CBD, CBN, so forth. The purpose of that is to custom tailor these medications towards specific ailments and to create a reproducible dosage system.
Dr. Whitmore?
Thank you.
That all?
Thank you.
Okay. And yet, let's see, Dr. Park, you had a question?
Our United States system proving the drug is one component, two component, most scientific background though. Medical cannabinoid has more than 70 compound.
85.
Yeah, so more than 85 is compound. Why is it different than the other drug approved by the FDA? This is number one. Number two is usually is approved for the medications or component is based upon the scientific background studies. Why is it different? This medical cannabinoid system is through the anecdotal case, patients, and the media, kinds of things. Why is it different? If our goal is for beneficial for the patients or Georgian, why is we a different way to approach? That's what we have to think about this.
I think Dr. Park's making a very good point. It's the same thing that I'm trying to do with our team. We're trying to bring medicine and science into this process, and we're not allowed to do a lot of things. The FDA, the DEA, we've heard about it all day long, banking. It's running cannabis businesses, whether it be in Oregon, a much more lawful state than others, it's still very difficult. And I have some trepidation that I'll be on the radar just speaking here today with the DEA and the DOJ and everybody, but that's okay. That's what pioneers have to kind of do. This is what we really want to do, Dr. Park, is work with you and others. And when I got introduced to Representative Peake with Dr. Morris and others, we all want to bring in the entire medical community in mainstream, but we can't bring them in all at once because there's a lot of fear. Liability. Just liability alone in the medical field would be huge to deal with cannabis. So the approach I recommend is observational studies that mimic the rigors of clinical trials. Don't call it a clinical trial using an institutional review board. Call it an observational study and document the heck out of it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. Any other questions for, Dr. Fitzgerald?
I have an extraction question. Obviously, if you have CO2 extraction and you avoid the problem of carbon chain contaminants, whatever it is, phenol or whatever it is, the difference I heard you say was terpene. And my question is, can you have a terpene enhancement, just like you add something to another drug, or does it depend on depend on it being there from the beginning in the extraction, or can you use a safer extraction method and then add the terpene back to it?
There's two viewpoints on that. Just like the synthetic version of THC seems to be not as well tolerated as organically derived versions of that. Yes, absolutely. There are companies in California that are recombining terpenes after the oil has been processed. Most of the time, I believe those companies are doing it for enhanced flavor profile more than an actual medicinal benefit. But there's absolutely no question that those terpenes can be added back at the end point of the process, and you could definitely use the, as you said, safer process of liquid carbon dioxide.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just have
one final comment. Sure.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I want to thank everybody. This is a real privilege and a real opportunity. At the top of my page, I want to always mention it's really about the patients and not the dollars. A lot of people run into this industry thinking they're going to make a lot of money. I'm not even turning a profit yet, but you can make money at it. But I'm really interested in the patients, and I think that really needs to be the focus of what you do. And don't worry about the money side. It will work, particularly if you start solving diseases with documenting. You'll be there. And the other thing is the butane extraction process is used in pharmaceuticals today and other things. It can be done safely. It's just a different type of process as well. So those are the. Thank you very much. It was a great privilege for this.
Well, we're glad to have you here, and we'll take anybody from the West Coast whenever y'all want to come on over here if you want to. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, our final presenter for the day, Mr. Mike Bragg, who is the president of CBD Pharms. Mike, come on up. Members of the committee, this will be our last presenter, and so we'll wrap up as soon as Mr. Bragg is done. Did you have a? Got some handouts. Okay, you want to go ahead and you want to help get those?
I don't know if I have enough.
Okay, we'll.
I also have a thumb drive for the slideshow.
Matt, you want to see if we can help with that too? And actually, you can present from there if you'd like to, Mike, and control your. It's up to you. So we'll put the mic on there. You can figure out how to make that work real quick. While we're here, I know we had a couple of my other colleagues that were in the audience. Dee Hawkins, we're glad to have you here. I know you've got a special interest in this issue, and so we're continuing to pray for you as well too. So let's see, Senator Jackson was here. Bill Jackson, Lester Jackson. Oh, where's Micah Gravely? See, Micah, he was here. There's Barbara Sims back there in the back. So yeah, just anybody else I'm missing. Okay, Mike, you teed up and ready to go, or you think, or?
Almost.
Okay.
Almost.
Now, I'm assuming you're not going to go through 40 pages here. Here you go. You take that one.
No,
okay, yeah.
I'm going to scale mine down since I'm the last guy. They've done me the benefit of really covering most of the.
Well, you can wrap us up with a bang here, so.
I'll try.
Tell us who you are and where you represent and where you're from. And,
sure.
Okay.
My name is Mike Bragg. I appreciate being here. I'm originally from Georgia. I am let me figure out how to work this slide here. Is it up there? How do I put it full screen? Let's see.
Let's see, Matt.
Here we go. Slideshow from the beginning. There we go. I'm the president of CBD Pharms. CBD Pharms is a California cooperative based in the San Francisco Bay Area. What we do is we provide medical cannabis to a small group of patients. And our primary focus is on being a wholesale provider to one medical dispensary in San Jose by the name of Elemental Wellness. We're basically one of their vendors. And we provide them with a variety of high THC, low THC, and non-THC products. All of our cannabis is laboratory tested for purity and potency, contaminants. I am also the director of greenhouse operations, which is just a fancy word for also being the grower. I manage the process from beginning to end. Over the last year or so, we've really started to focus on extracts and researching the different types of extracts and formulations, edibles, and things of that sort, because a lot of the industry seems to be headed that way. That being the case, recently, earlier this year, we also started a company by the name of Evolve Therapeutics, which will be trying to establish facilities in multiple states to do this, to produce the different types of cannabinoid-based medications, such as the soft gel capsules and the oils. So how did I get here? A little bit of background about me so that you can kind of know some of the things I'm going to cover. I'm going to try to cover a couple of different viewpoints than were already shared here. Like I said, I'm originally from South Georgia. Grew up in Albany, but went to school right down the street here at Georgia State University and graduated with a real estate degree. Started working for 2 commercial real estate firms here in the city, 2 global firms, and was involved with multiple complex or multiple large-scale real estate projects here in the state of Georgia. In 2005, I started my own commercial real estate company by the name of Flint Advisors, named after, of course, the Flint River. And was involved with a variety of different projects, did some commercial brokerage, also some commercial development. Got involved with downtown Albany, helping downtown Albany redevelop their downtown, working with a group called Albany Tomorrow. And it was really there that I started to get introduced and got exposed to the power of public-private partnerships when you started to see some of these specialized research facilities being delivered for these type of business structures. I started doing some work for a group that some of you may be familiar with, Gateway Development, who you may not recognize the name, but they've developed Technology Enterprise Park and Technology Square there at Georgia Tech. Some of you guys may office there. The whole idea behind that concept was to put together public and private entities and the university arm and to improve the state of Georgia, basically, create new ideas and new economic development initiatives. That was fun, but in 2008, the market started to tank, as everyone knows, and I decided to close the company and relocate to California to start studying medical cannabis. The reason I started, I didn't do that blindly. Some of the presenters have mentioned it, and I believe one of the panel members mentioned it. Thanks to the internet, we can see so much information now and get so much information. But it's one of the main studies that motivated me was a research that was coming actually out of the San Francisco area by Dr. Sean McAllister and Pierre Desprez that were studying how CBD seemed to slow or possibly stop the spread of aggressive breast cancer. Another study that that piqued my interest was out of Spain and looked at how CBD and THC, when used in conjunction with chemotherapy, seems to increase the effectiveness of chemotherapy. So a lot of these things were going on at the same time that I was out here researching it. When I moved to California, I'm actually a patient myself. I have a hiatal hernia and have struggled with this since 3rd grade. It's some of the symptoms I have are pretty incapacitating, I guess, at times, depending on the situation. But medical cannabis seems to alleviate some of my symptoms. But anyway, in 2014, my wife and I founded CBD Pharms. We had started working with a strain of cannabis. This is actually the test results here of the strain of cannabis. That's our primary strain. It's a low THC strain that has about 11% CBD. and about 4.5% THC. Has a high level of beta-myrcene, which a lot of people, have talked about. Same time we were incorporating our company, my father-in-law was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. And I mentioned that to you, Alan, I think when I first reached out to you, some of the things we were doing there and treating him with cannabis oil. So we got to learn firsthand some of the challenges that come along with when you have a loved one that has cancer. He had stage 3 lung cancer, and you find yourself confronted with this challenge where you're sitting on this product that supposedly the scientists tell you that it could possibly help slow the growth of cancer, possibly cure the cancer, but yet you're on the other side of the country, so you have to try to figure out how to get your loved one the medication. I can definitely empathize with everyone that's gone through that. It was a tough time for us and our family. After the 3rd week of chemotherapy, it took some persuading because my father-in-law is an old school Southern guy down in Albany, Georgia, never condoned the use of cannabis at all. But after his 3rd week of chemo, he didn't need much more persuasion, as you can imagine. It was starting to take its toll on him. He couldn't get off the couch much, couldn't do much. So we started a therapy of 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC for 2 weeks of extract. And immediately the next day, he had increased appetite. He slept better. He had a better attitude. Was cracking jokes. Was more affectionate with his family and his wife. Things that he hadn't really done over the previous month. The most surprising thing, though, and encouraging thing, was that when he went back in for his 2nd round of chemotherapy, the doctor said that they noticed significant or noticeable tumor shrinkage. The tumors had shrank, and they seemed somewhat surprised that it was had happened so quickly, so much that they wanted to do some further testing, of course. That's one of the things where it kind of started to take a turn for the worse, I guess, in some sense, because of his programming for all these years that this thing is bad. He started getting very paranoid and worried that he was going to be found out, that he's got cannabis and THC in his blood, so he stopped taking the medication. We used extracts. We tried a little bit of everything, honestly. Oral mucosal oils and tinctures. We put the extracts in capsules, and that seemed to be his preferred method of dosing because it's, we all take vitamins and pills and things of that sort, so that seemed to be his preferred method. You guys asked me here to talk about some of the best practices and recommendations. I'm going to just kind of share a little bit as far as, with all of that being said, where do we begin on this? I think the main thing we begin is with the patients. I appreciate Jason Cranford. I think he's really leading the way across the country, across the world, in what he's doing, and Surterra with some of their design ideas as far as the greenhouses. That's all standard industry things right now. But if we talk about the patients, I took the liberty of putting some dosage information on here. GW Pharmaceutical, for their MS patients, recommend a 63 milligrams of CBD to THC 1-to-1 ratio. I think someone mentioned it earlier. I believe it was Jason that talked about a higher level of THC allows you to use less amount of product. And that seems to be, GW seems to recommend some of the lowest doses when it comes to MS anyway. And it's probably because of the CBD-THC ratio. We're still learning and trying to figure out why. But CW Botanical, if you look at some of their industry recommendations from the realm of carrying, they recommend 2 milligrams per pound. And then, of course, Raphael Machulam, 200 milligrams of CBD per day for adults with epilepsy. And I do this just because before I started majoring in real estate, I was an actuary, so I'm a numbers guy, right? So I'm going to put a little numbers here just so we can kind of realize what we're up against. If you have 500,000 patients and each patient doses the minimum 63 milligrams per day, that works out, and granted, most of the patients need this daily. It's not something, even though I would encourage, one of the things I'm a big proponent of is the university involvement. I think there needs to be maybe possibly, like Jason Cranford said, an exemption for possibly universities or someone to be able to explore the use of higher potencies for short-term cancer treatment and things of that sort for experimentation. But if you look at these numbers and see that just to meet 10% of the need of the patients here in the state of Georgia, you're going to need about 2,500 pounds of extract, which may seem like a lot, but it's really not that much. And that extract obviously is the chemicals you're taking out of the plant. So in order to do that, you're going to have more plant product to do that. I went down and I ran the numbers on how many whole flowers would you need. So to meet 10% of the patient's requirement here in the state of Georgia, you're going to need somewhere from 13 to 17,000 pounds of medical cannabis being grown. Based on our methods of growing, like I said, we grow indoor in a warehouse. It's a commercial facility in a hydroponic greenhouse. To scale at a 50,000 square foot facility can produce about 5,500 pounds of whole flowers per year. So to meet 100% of the patient's needs, you're talking about 1 million square feet of production space that needs to happen. And I say this because this is what I did back in commercial real estate. I kind of go in and help companies figure out exactly what they need. So I just break this down like this so we can kind of have an idea when you're making your considerations to the Assembly and the Governor. That may sound like a lot, and based on what the state of Georgia considers a development of regional impact, that would be considered a development of regional impact, over 1 million square feet. But then again, if you go talk to my uncle down in South Georgia that's a farmer, and he wouldn't talk in square feet, he'd talk acres, and you'd say 25 acres. At 25 acres, we're talking about doing this. He would probably think you couldn't make a living off farming 25 acres. But that's pretty encouraging to think that out of 25 acres of land, you can produce enough product to meet 500,000 patients in the state of Georgia, meet their need. I put this in there just kind of in comparison. The recent project that came through, Project Marathon, was 1.2 million square feet. I titled this just kind of a scenario of how if this were to play out, and called it Georgia's Project Cramp. Probably because some of the people here, especially the GBI director, is probably getting a cramp right now thinking about this. But it's really easily doable. It's 1 million square feet. The cost to build, there's a range, from $50 to $300, depending on how high tech you want to go with it. Of course, the laboratories would be the most expensive, but this would consist of greenhouses and warehouses and laboratories. And the location could be strategic, but my suggestion is that you locate it together. That's what CRAMP actually stands for, Cannabis Research and Manufacturing Park. Setting aside an area in Georgia or a couple areas where you locate everyone together so that they can somewhat have a collaborative effect with the university and the regulators. The team on this would be, obviously manufacturers and developers that would develop the land, engineers and architects. We're not talking about a bunch of, hippies here putting this together. It'd be a serious undertaking, and like I said, universities would need to be involved so that they could, get involved with observational studies that were mentioned here earlier, and of course the regulators. And I put this slide in just so that we can remember where we're at. Georgia has such a strong research presence with the CDC and Emory, and I promise you, I didn't plan any certain way when putting the University of Georgia on top of Georgia Tech. That's just the way it is.
That's usually the way it works, unfortunately. Sorry, all my tech fans out there. Sorry.
So, best practices. There aren't many. In the commercial real estate industry, we've had lots of best practices. That we talked about in the legal law firms, but this industry is still emerging. I think if you are going to look for best practices, you'd be looking at people like Jason Cranford and things going on in Colorado and Canada. And I think Americans for Safe Access, the gentleman here, Mike, did a great job laying out all the details. Some of the things we do know, though, is that this is a facility-based industry. You have to have adequate and safe and industrial level facilities in order to do this. And you're also seeing a trend toward larger scale and fewer producers, which Surterra mentioned. That really helps with the regulation. And then the industrial standards, you have to have the same type of standards that the pharmaceutical companies are using in the production and the extraction processes. And that ensures the safety component. I'll skip through some of these things here. I think all of this that you've heard today, you've gotten a lot, and we've really covered almost everything.
Mike, let me ask you, Mr. Bragg, let me ask you, just the business. I'm saying the question I asked kind of a couple of other folks, the Surterra folks. Does the business model work for what we have currently in Georgia law? 8 medical diagnoses, THC limits of X and X. Does that business model work where an investor like you would come into Georgia and say, okay, yeah, there's enough demand to invest millions of dollars for this?
Sure. And it will take millions. The big component that is probably the most important is actually getting the patients on board. Like I said about my father-in-law, he's got lots of things in his mind about this plant, about this treatment type that makes him not really want to get involved. And I think Georgia has a lot of those types of people here. So that would be the big component, is really having a group push on onboarding patients and ensuring patient participation.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's pretty much it. I mean, I think as far to close, as far as production, I think you've got a great team that you've assembled. We can definitely make it safely, legally, and effectively within the state of Georgia. Again, the demand is going to be the big thing to get these patients and the doctors encouraging it and onboarded. And then the time, like I said, we're losing people, and these things take time. It takes time to build a facility, and then it takes time to get a facility at 100%, because we're not going to be able to just load up a truck full of 1,000 plants and bring them to the state of Georgia. It's going to take time. So.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Bragg, thank you. You up for taking some questions if there are some?
Sure.
From the committee? Let's see. Yes, sir. Chief.
I just have a question, and may have to go back to the first presenter too. He made a comment that I would like a little clarification on, and it goes to your square footage thing. And I remember you saying something along the lines of the THC now that's usually being produced is 10, 20, 30%, and it's more efficient to grow it and produce it at that level to get to the oil level that you need. So my question is, are you saying, and I didn't catch it earlier, are you saying that to be able to do something like the 25 or the 1 million square foot, you would have to grow it in higher level THC to be, I guess, cost effective? Does that make sense?
That's a fair question, yeah. Jason, why don't you come on up, and if you don't mind, you can stay there, and Jason, come on up. Jason, why don't you come to the front one and just sit down for a minute, because we may have a few more questions for you too. So, Mike, why don't you want to take a crack at that first, and
take what?
You want to take
yeah, that's true. I think he'll probably say something along the same lines, that that's one thing I think is important, that higher level. Throughout this process, even in the extraction process, when you extract the chemicals out of the plant, the THC, we're going to have a product that is, almost, a higher level of THC, but then you go in and you have to mix it with the carrying liquid and dilute it to the approved levels. So,
Jason, you want to follow up on that? I got you.
What I was saying is that if you have 1,000 square feet and you're growing a strain that's 10% THC, you're going to get X amount of milligrams out. If you have a strain that's 20% THC, you can get the same amount of milligrams out of 500 square feet. So it's basically you're doubling your production in a smaller space. So unless you want, really massive grows, they're still going to be producing THC. They're still going to produce in milligrams, but it's just more efficient with less space to use a higher strain.
Well, I think Chief Cotton is on to an important, and you stop me if I'm not answering the question, but the concern would be, okay, all of a sudden we're having to breed a higher level of THC plant that could potentially get stolen and abused on the black market. Is that kind of where?
Well, I mean, that's where I'm getting at, is we're talking about, in our law is low THC content, but yet to be effective and for the business model, if you go that way, then the high THC content would have to be the one you would grow to, if I'm hearing correctly, to water it down to the oil level that would be effective. Is that kind of how I'm putting it in layman's terms? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, so I use CO2 extraction, and with CO2 extraction, the THC oil that comes out is roughly 85%. So for 1 gram of the extract, you'll have 850 milligrams of THC. So I think that it would be easier to regulate if the higher THC strains are allowed because your grows aren't going to be as large. Basically, if you put a cap on it, you're just going to make us producers work twice as hard. We're going to have twice as many plants, twice the employees, twice the square footage. And at the end of the day, you're going to get THC out of both of the plants. One is just a more effective producer than the other.
And from a regulatory standpoint, though, our current law is saying THC content of 5% or less.
That's correct.
So our current law would not address on the regulatory side.
That's correct.
It would not address that higher level of THC for the production side, correct?
Yeah, we would probably have to revisit that on any type of in-state cultivation legislation.
I just want to make sure we were all talking apples and oranges.
So one point I'd like to make is, say we have a plant over here that's 20%, a plant over here that's 5%. When we extract from this plant and this plant, you're still going to get THC out of both plants, but I'm going to get more out of the 20% strain than I am off the 10 or 5. I'm going to get 4 times or either twice as much. So at the end of the day, you still end up with the same intoxicating compound. It's just with the lower percentages in the strains, you have to work twice as hard and grow twice as much. So it'll actually be less plants with the 20% as opposed to the 10%.
But that is a valid concern that we're going to have to address. And that's why the security measures are so important in whatever we do if we were to do an in-state cultivation in Georgia. So, Chief Cotton, is that all? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Whitmore?
So I have a question. I think I heard, there's a lot of good information, but I think I heard that the THCA was not the psychosis mind altering. So then is it possible to grow a plant where most of the THC component is A, which would then alleviate some of the concern about abuse potential?
It is. It all comes out as THCA. So when I run it through the CO2 extractors, the oil is kind of like pine sap or, like from a pine tree. And so this oil is non-decarboxylated, so it's THCA. The good thing about this is if we put this into a liquid like coconut oil, safflower oil, whatever carrier you dilute it down with, it's almost impossible to decarboxylate it after that point. It would take days, you would never be able to decarboxylate it. So once it's put into the finished product, it would still be non-intoxicating and nobody would be able to abuse it.
Okay. But only if that is heated above 200 degrees, you said, then it becomes decarboxylated?
That's correct. So
if you smoke it, then it's mind altering.
Yeah, and people don't realize that the stuff in the joint is actually non-activated, so it's non-decarboxylated and it doesn't get you high. If you were to eat the joint, you wouldn't feel it. The flame, the cherry, the fire, that's what is actually decarboxylating the smoke as you inhale it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Jason, just stay there for a minute. Mr. Bragg, any more questions for Mr. Bragg? Mr. Bragg, thank you. I always love to have Georgia natives back home, so appreciate you being here. So, Mr. Cranford, you're kind of been our go-to guy on this thing. You've gone through this several times with us. You've heard the testimony today. Any final thoughts you'd like to add that we didn't ask, that we should have asked? Does the model work? If it's the public policy of this state to have in-state cultivation under the current law that we have?
Yes, and I would, I know Colorado gets picked on a lot because we do allow recreational products, and it's become the pothead state of the country or whatever. But look at our crime rates right now. Like, look at the statistics. We've had 5 prisons close because they don't have the prisoners to house them. We built 6 schools off of the taxpayer dollars, from the sale of marijuana. So overall, the social impact in Colorado has been very positive. I think our crime rate in Colorado is way lower than the crime rate in Georgia.
And I know there's a lot of diverse opinion about that, and I get that, and there's a lot of diverse, heated rhetoric about that particular social impact. I'm more interested in, though, does the business plan work? Can there be security? Can there be an efficient product? Can there be proper lab testing that can make law enforcement assured that there's not going to be a rampant additional drug problem because of what we're providing, medical cannabis oil? So that's what I'm more asking the question centered around.
Absolutely. The security measures in other states, Connecticut is one of the states that I work in, and we are treated just like a pharmaceutical company. We have to have cameras in every room, no blind spots, has to be internet-based. And we could even give Mr. Keenan the username and passwords for these surveillance systems, so anytime the GBI could just log on to the camera and look through our actual cameras in our facilities and monitor what we're doing.
Okay. Anybody else have any final questions for Mr. Cranford? Okay, thanks, Mr. Cranford. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, members of the committee, we are done with testimony for today. As I mentioned earlier, we're probably looking at 3 more meetings before the end of December. I'll try and get a notice out to you as soon as possible about those meetings so we can kind of get it on the schedule. Any comments from any member before we adjourn? I mean, have you got thoughts? Are we heading in the right direction? You happy with what we want? Anything else you'd like to hear about? Yeah, Dr. Whitmore.
I think this was great. I learned a lot, and I think that the diversity of speakers and the different perspectives was really tremendous. Thank you very much.
I think what we're going to try and focus on, Dr. Park, we're counting on you to maybe provide some input at maybe one of the hearings kind of focused on the medical profession and the other medical professionals we have here. We'd love to kind of hear from you. And we're going to, I think Dr. Morris, I've actually invited to come speak at one of our hearings as well, the leading gastroenterologist in the state. So we'll also hopefully have some input from law enforcement. So to Chief Cotton and Sheriff Gulich and Mr. Keenan, we kind of want to get some input from you guys as well too, and ladies, of what works. And then if you have other thoughts, I think we all are kind of teed up on an email stream. So if you have other thoughts that you'd like to hear about, please feel free. Before we leave, Commissioner Black, I know you came in late. We're glad to have you here. Thank you for what you do for our state and the biggest industry next to maybe the hospitality industry in the state. So glad to have you here. You got any thoughts or comments before we adjourn?
If the chairman would just serve more Georgia-grown products in his restaurant.
We serve a lot of good products in my restaurants. I can promise you that. A lot of them are from Georgia. So, okay. A lot of chicken from Gainesville, I can promise you that. So, Hall County.
Mr. Commissioner, we'd just like to clarify what you mean by Georgia-grown products in this environment.
Yeah, I hear you. Leave it to a car dealer to come up with a good wisecrack to end this welfare. Okay, folks, thank you. What we're doing is an important work here. I hope you realize that. It's important to a lot of citizens in our state. So thank you for your time and energy and being involved, and we are adjourned. Thank you.